It's definitely a confusing time trying to follow U.S. global policy, isn't it?
It really is. Things seem to be shifting so quickly.
Yeah, one minute you're reading about tariffs, the next it's diplomatic meetings, and then something like, well, Operation Sindoor happens. It's hard to see the connecting threads sometimes.
Absolutely. And that's what we're trying to unpack today. We've gathered quite a bit of information looking at these recent developments to figure out the why.
Right. We want to delve into these trade tariffs, the whole U.S. India relationship dynamic, and then the fallout from Operation Sindoor.
And explore what it all might mean, the potential consequences,
Yeah.
because it really feels like these things are interconnected.
Definitely. We found some angles that, well, they might make you rethink how you see things.
So where should we start? Maybe with the tariffs. That announcement on April 2nd, President Trump in the Rose Garden, that felt like a big moment.
Oh, for sure. It really grabbed the headlines. He put that, what was it, 20% tariff on EU imports.
Yeah, citing the EU's 39% tariff on U.S. goods, called it half reciprocal, which is an interesting term.
It is. And it wasn't just the EU, was it? Canada's dairy, Japan's rice levies.
Yeah.
It was quite broad.
It was. And just to be clear for everyone, tariffs are basically taxes on goods coming into a country. The idea usually is to, make imports more expensive to help out domestic producers.
Simple concept, but the reality is messy. Because when you do that, other countries tend to hit back, right?
Almost inevitably. Retaliation is pretty standard. So the EU could easily hike their tariffs even more.
And then suddenly things you buy get more expensive, like that French cheese you've not had before, or maybe German cars.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just European goods. It affects the cost of things coming from various places targeted by these or retaliatory tariffs.
So while the political message might be America first, which, resonates with some,
Uh-huh.
the person on the street might just end up paying more for, well, lots of things. Smartphones, sneakers, even coffee sometimes, depending on where it comes from in the supply chains.
That's the direct consumer impact, often. But there are other ripples. We saw analysis suggesting India might potentially benefit from this.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, the idea is if it becomes more expensive or difficult for companies to manufacture in or source from, say, China because of U.S. tariffs.
They might look for alternatives.
Precisely. And India could be seen as a viable alternative manufacturing hub. It's an opportunity for their sector.
But it's not automatic, right? There were warnings about challenges.
Definitely. Logistics, infrastructure, bureaucracy, India would need to really step up its game to capture that shift effectively. It's not just about being cheaper, it's about being efficient and reliable.
And China. They won't just sit back.
No way. They'll be recalibrating, adjusting supply chains, maybe rerouting exports through other countries. They're very adept at navigating these kinds of pressures.
So it's this complex web. Tariffs go up, consumers might pay more, some countries see an opportunity, others have to adapt. It's a major reshuffle.
It truly is. And this economic maneuvering ties into the diplomatic side, too, especially with India. Remember President Trump's meeting with Prime Minister Modi back in February?
They do in D.C. Lots of talk about vibrant democracies and deepening ties in the Indo-Pacific.
Right. A lot of focus on that strategic partnership. Yeah. And behind the scenes, or perhaps not so behind the scenes, there's a U.S. interest in India buying more American defense equipment.
To counter China's influence in the region?
That seems to be a major driver, yes. Strengthening India as a strategic counterweight. We saw Defense Secretary Hegseth meeting with India's Defense Minister Singh just before that, talking operational cooperation and defense industrial collaboration.
So a real push on the security front, joint exercises, maybe tech sharing.
That's the direction. And here's where it gets complicated again.
Uh-oh.
The U.S. also hit India with some of those reciprocal tariffs we talked about.
Right.
That was confirmed in April.
So strategic partners, but also tariff targets? That seems tricky.
It is. And India's reaction was, let's say, quite measured. They acknowledged it, but didn't escalate things dramatically.
Keeping their options open, maintaining their own path.
Exactly. There was an editorial pointing out India's consistent rejection of third-party mediation in its affairs, that commitment to sovereignty and non-alignment, even in this changing world.
So they value the U.S. relationship, clearly, but they're not just going to fall into line with every U.S. objective. They have their own strategic calculations.
That sums it up well. It's a balancing act,
Yeah.
which actually leads us directly into discussing Operation Sindoor.
Right. That started with the horrific attack in Pahalgam, Jammu, and Kashmir in late April. A really tragic event.
Absolutely devastating. The loss of security personnel, civilians, and that specific story about the newlywed couple. Just awful.
And that was a catalyst for Operation Sindoor, India's military response.
Within about 2 weeks, yes. They announced strikes against what they identified as terror camps inside Pakistan.
And this felt different from previous actions, didn't it? More public.
Very much so. Unlike the surgical strikes in 2016 or 2019, which had a degree of sort of deniability or ambiguity around them, this time India was very open about it, announcing they hit 9 bases, eliminated over 100 operatives.
Including relatives of a known militant leader, apparently.
Yes, reports mentioned relatives of Maulana Masood Azhar. It was a very direct message, not just to the terror groups, but also aimed squarely at their sponsors, perceived to be in Pakistan.
Someone called it a non-contact war model, targeting the infrastructure and sponsors without, a full-scale ground conflict.
That was S. Gurumurthy's analysis. And it certainly escalated tensions dramatically. We saw reports of explosion-like sounds near the border, drone sightings, a very nervous period.
Until that ceasefire was announced, brokered with U.S. involvement, Trump and Secretary of State Rubio.
Yes, which shows the level of international concern. Even China weighed in, calling for calm. Pakistan's foreign minister also made a statement, conditional, but acknowledging the de-escalation efforts.
A really dangerous flashpoint, then, highlighting India's willingness to act decisively and openly on its security concerns, independent of, perhaps, external pressures.
Absolutely. It showcased a more assertive posture. So, tying these threads together, the tariffs, the complex U.S. India dance, India's independent military action, what does it all mean for the global picture? Who are the potential winners and losers here?
Well, we mentioned India potentially gaining from trade shifts away from China, but that's conditional on them getting their house in order, infrastructure-wise.
Big if there. And China clearly faces challenges from the tariffs. They need to rethink supply chains, maybe use routes like Vietnam to get goods out, which comes with its own complications.
There was that piece warning about a potential upheaval of global power dynamics because of all this friction. It's not just about who sells what.
No, it's fundamental. It touches on global influence, alliances, the whole structure. And let's not forget the American consumer in all this.
Likely paying more for goods. That seems almost certain if these tariffs stick or escalate.
And the overall global economy, disrupted trade, rising prices, uncertainty. It's generally not a recipe for robust growth.
It also makes you think about America's non-economic influence, its soft power.
That's a really important point. Things like visa restrictions, the whole America First rhetoric. Does that make the U.S. less attractive?
We saw that article back in January talking about the struggles of the Indian diaspora in the U.S., a sense of maybe not feeling as welcome.
It's possible.
Yeah.
And contrast that with what India is trying to do, position itself as an education hub, reforming testing, investing in digital learning.
So if the U.S. tightens its borders too much, for students, for skilled workers...
It could lose talent that might go to India or Canada or Europe instead. It could be shooting itself in the foot long term.
It feels like a lot of competing priorities in U.S. policy right now. Economic protectionism, countering China, military strength, managing alliances. How do they all fit together? Is there a coherent strategy?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
We hear about things like Project 2025, that huge blueprint for a potential second Trump term.
Yeah, the 900-page plan. Slashing agencies, boosting domestic energy. Very ambitious conservative goals.
Ambitious, yes. But coordinating and implementing something that vast, while also juggling these immediate global crises and trade disputes, it's incredibly complex.
Yeah.
The potential for missteps or unintended consequences is huge.
It really highlights that the decisions made in Washington have ripple effects everywhere. The stakes are incredibly high.
They are. The U.S. is still undoubtedly a major global power. What it does or doesn't do impacts global trade, security, the balance of power, everything.
And you can bet countries like India, China, everyone really is watching very, very closely, trying to navigate these currents.
Absolutely. They're all adjusting their own strategies in response.
So for you listening, it's worth keeping in mind that these big geopolitical shifts, they do eventually trickle down. They affect the economy you live in, the prices you pay, the opportunities available. Staying informed is, well, pretty crucial.
It really is. These are complex times, and understanding these different policy threads helps make sense of the bigger picture. It leaves you wondering, though, what are the truly long-term consequences going to be? And how will this reshape the world order in the years to come? Something to keep watching.